about top talent, the Googlers and Facebookers of the world, the engineers just like coming, knocking on your door, begging for a job, willing to work for free? Anybody? Okay. Well, that's good. That's good, because if you answer no to any of those questions, then it's good. You should stay. Congratulations, you're a startup, just like me. You have to face all these problems, and unfortunately, no one's here to help you. It's on to you. For anybody who did answer yes, I think that guy in the back, the Apple employees are gathering in the next room. So there's some kind of thing there. They won't let us in. Anyways. Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about scalable marketing. And when I talk about scalable marketing, I really just think about it as a predictive way to take a marketing avenue or path and then have it be experimented with and have that turn out to be a positive ROI for you, but then have that be scalable so that you can do it over and over again predictably and be able to grow your entire business around that. So, when Paul asked me to talk about marketing, I told him that was a really big topic. And then I asked him how long I had, and he said less than an hour. So we decided to narrow that down, and that's why scalable marketing is what we're going to talk about. But more specifically than scalable marketing, we're going to talk about outbound marketing. So the way I like to think about outbound and inbound marketing is where outbound, that's kind of like your paid ads, your trade shows, your direct mail, your calls and emails. That's basically when you're going out and almost sniping your targeted customers, trying to get your message across to them. And so a good way to think about that is that you know they need your product. It's just a matter of convincing them that they need it. But you know they're the right fit. Where on inbound marketing, the way to think about that is the inverse. So that's when you kind of plant seeds or cast nets, however you want to refer to it. But that's when you blog or you do your SEO or social. Basically, it's content that you put out there, and content relevant to what your product can do or sell or achieve for someone. And it's exactly the inverse of outbound, where you are putting content and hoping that someone who has that pain comes across that content, and then you're hoping that you can pull them in and have a conversation with them so that you can tell them why you're going to be able to solve that pain for them. And so that's kind of the way I think about those two. And but to focus today's conversation, we'll be talking about today's, we'll be talking about outbound marketing. But I do want to point out that there is a scalable way to do inbound marketing as well. It's just another topic, another day. So without further ado, let's continue. So even more specifically, what I'm going to want to go through here and teach you is that your value proposition to the right person, to the right audience. How do you deliver your value proposition to the right audience? And how do you do that in a scalable way? So that you do it to your first customer or to your gajillion customer. Or you do it to your first investor, gajillion investor. Or you do it to your first partner, and then your gajillion partner. Of course, gajillion is a big number, but yes. So we'll talk about how to approach that. We'll talk about some of the tools that you could use to do that, kind of automate that. We'll talk about the best practice. And most importantly, we'll talk about how to avoid some critical mistakes. And so at the end of the day, when you walk out of here, I hope that what you gain is essentially a valuable tool in your tool shed. The ability to prospect anybody and get your message delivered to them in an efficient manner that will scale. So why you should listen to me, I don't know. But I started thinking about this and I figured I'm going to talk to you guys and try to educate you on something, and who am I to tell you anything? Well, first off, it's free, so got nothing to lose. Free pizza as well, thanks to the generosity of Mashify. They're looking for people. And also, I have gotten a little lucky along the way. I will admit I've been fortunate. And through that experience, I got to learn a couple of things, things that I just love sharing with other founders. I also do invest in mentor other startups, and through that experience as well, I've gotten to see a lot of different business models, a lot of different avenues for marketing and sales, and I've seen what does work and what doesn't. But most of all, really, you should listen to me because, not the sales and marketing dork, but because I'm currently doing this right now with GoCo, and I'm tackling it. I'm literally stepping through the mud, as you guys would, with this stuff and trying to figure it out. And it's not easy, and I don't guarantee success, but I will guarantee to at least equip you and arm you with some tools to get there. So the approach is really easy, right? I mean, everything is easy in theory. You just identify your audience, you figure out what touch points you should approach them with, and then you measure that. You continue to iterate to improve that messaging and identify that audience even further and further down, and then you just scale it. I wish I could end the talk here and everybody can go home and do that. That would be great. But unfortunately, it's a lot of hard work, and we've discovered that over the last 3 months ourselves. And so I just want to iterate, though, again, that even though this is probably most interesting for using with customers, I will say that we used it first for product market fit. So the way we did that is we basically went to who we thought the audience were. So everything was a hypothesis at that point. Went to who we thought the audience would be. We talked to those audience and presented them a product, which was really a prototype put by our chief of product, Michael Google. You'll hear more about him later. But he put a quick prototype together via, I think it was called Envision. It's an app that you can just kind of illustrate together. And then we started asking them, do you want to buy this? You know, will you buy this? And we learned so much in that process. So my point is that even if you have a product, even if you don't have a product right this second, you could start prospecting today. You could start talking to your customers today to help you refine that product, to help you understand better what it is that they want so that you can build that product a lot more efficiently towards solving those pain points. But we've also used it to prospect strategic partners, and we plan in the near future to go after talent recruitment. So Dane, this might be something that you could use for getting some people, and also for fundraising. This is, like I said, just a valuable tool you can use for anything. So again, and it's really easy, right? Identify your audience, and we'll go through that. There we go. I was hoping someone would come in. Touch points, what's the last one? Measure, iterate, and scale. There you go. So let's talk about a case study, because I think the best way to learn is a case study. And really, I don't claim to be an expert on this stuff. I just claim to be, one of the guys that went through it. So let me talk to you about what we've done. So first of all, I want to introduce you guys to my team at GoCo. This is the original 5. Round of applause for them. They're awesome. These guys are the soldiers that are going through the battle with me. And so we had this mission where we decided we want to simplify the way operations and administration works in the workplace. We want to make that simple. We want to make that experience lovely. We want people to walk away, and employees and employers to go from one place to another and say, how did we live without GoCo before? Why do we have to do this paperwork? Why do we have to deal with all this administration nonsense? We should be focusing on things like this, marketing and sales. And so we had this mission, and it's not necessarily a novel mission. It's there's lots of companies with that mission, but we just figured with our experience in having to deal with those nonsense things, we may be able to figure it out and help a lot of people. So we figured, hey, well, let's go make HR easy. Let's go make benefits and payroll easy. Let's go see how we can make all that paperwork of that archaic industry, of the insurance industry, much, much easier, and just make that experience better. And so in doing that, we had a conversation internally. That team that you saw there, everybody gets a voice. We're all sitting around a round table, and we're talking, how do we go to market? Meanwhile, the engineers are building, right? And we're building prototypes, and we're contacting customers. But how do we go to market? And that's the question we were all trying to decide. And so there were two schools of thought. One was we should go directly to the companies. Let's knock on some doors and say, hey, we got a really great piece of software for you, right? We know outbound marketing. We know you're a fit. You just have to believe us and come try it, and you'll thank us, right? And so we said, let's go after companies. And there's another school of thought. I said, well, wait a second. Why don't we partner up with the brokers? So let me take a step back and explain. There's another company out there, out in Silicon Valley, who just raised, I think their recent round, another $500 million at something ridiculous like a $4.5 billion valuation. And they're just kicking butts, taking names, and we love what they're doing. But what they're doing is very similar to what we wanted to do. We just got inspired, let's say, by their success. But they're basically disrupting the insurance broker industry right now. So every traditional broker that used to be out there basically selling insurance to companies is now being disrupted by this company. And what's happening is that these traditional brokers, who tend to be a little less tech savvy, but lots of ambition, lots of inspiration, they want to level the playing field. So they're trying to figure out another piece of software to level the playing field, to basically compete. So I tell you all this to give you context, because the other school of thought was, let's go after partners. Let's go work with those brokers and give them our software and use them as an acquisition channel, which is, a very old school way of doing business. You have all the customers, I have something you want, let's do business, right? And so we thought, well, how do we figure this out? They're both really great, viable opportunities. On one hand, you got direct to companies with a company out in Silicon Valley that has proven there's a path there, right? And then on the other hand, you've got an opportunity that was created by that very same company that we may want to be able to utilize to accelerate ourselves. And so instead of just sitting around, we did first, there was a suggestion that we should play a game of shuffleboard for it. And we did, but after we played the game of shuffleboard, we discovered that we didn't actually achieve an answer. So we decided, hey, let's go figure out another way to do this. And so we decided, let's go and collect data and figure out what will actually work better. So I'm going to walk you through this use case. I'm going to walk you through basically the day-to-day that we went through to figure out and how to arrive at this answer. And it started by identifying our audience. So let me just talk a little bit about identifying your audience. And I apologize that I keep looking back there, but usually I have a front monitor and there's not one here. So not a problem, I just, apologize when I look away. So a person most likely to buy your product, right? That is that's identify your ideal target profile. Some people call it an ideal customer profile if you're going after a customer, but because I think of this tool as a lot more generic, this whole talk is a lot more generic of how to approach any audience, we'll just call it a target profile instead of a customer profile. And so we just shortened it for ITP because that's what people in the biz like to do. We like to abbreviate and acronym things. So person most likely to buy your product, that's who we're going to go after. So in our case that was the brokers or the companies, right? But we'll have to define that a little more clearly because there's a billion companies out there, or maybe at least tens of millions. And then there's lots of brokers out there. So where do we start? And how do we get the most effective and efficient return on our investment, our time, because it's finite. And so the more specific you can get, the better. So if you have a product right now, think about the product that you have and who your customer is, and think of how you would go find 1,000 of those customers. And so I would start by maybe identifying the industry that they're in, right? I mean, lots of companies here are doing health or energy, so maybe that's a good place to start. Another one is geography, so maybe it's much easier for you to go after someone in Texas because you can go for a follow-up meeting in person, or maybe it just makes sense to go after someone in California because there's a legislation that makes a lot more sense for whatever product you're building. And then you kind of just go down and you just figure out, well, how big is this company? What do they look like? Are they 10 employees, like a startup? which is what we wanted to go after, 10 to 50 employees, or are they, the Fortune 5,000? Narrow that down. And then, as many as you can until you kind of get to that point. And then start thinking about who is that person in that company? What is their functional role? What are they actually dealing with on the day-to-day that my product is going to solve for them? And once you've narrowed that down, you've got your ideal targeted profile. Here's a pro tip for you. For those of you that are fortunate enough to already have a product and a customer, that's a really good place to start. Customers, go ask them. Say, how did you find out about us? What did we solve for you? Who was the person who made that decision in your organization? How many people did it take to talk about that decision? Why did you choose us and not X competitor? Get to the bottom of it. It'll help you identify your targeted profile a lot better, because the best place to start is in someone that already made the decision to elect you. Okay, so let's get back to our case study for a second. So our ideal target profile, if you remember, we have the two school of thoughts. For school of thought for going direct to companies, we decided we're going to go after high-tech companies. We want them to be younger than 5 years because we assume that they're going to be a little more tech-savvy and a little more forward-thinking in the way that they want to optimize their processes and so forth. We wanted someone between 0 and 100 employees, and the reason we did that is because first, easier, shorter sales cycle to get a company that's under 100 to make a decision rather than going after a Fortune 5,000. And we wanted to learn fast. The other reason is that there's some legislation, thanks to the Affordable Care Act, that made it easier for us to compete with other brokers who are offering the same service to those companies. And so we decided 100 or less is what we're going to go after. We also wanted to I'll talk to you a little bit about target timing. So we wanted to figure out the right time to approach these guys. So we were ideally looking for people who had just raised a fund or in the midst of raising one, or someone that's currently hiring, and trying to scale up their workforce. And so we also tested in the Texas, New York, and California just to get a good level of field, and we also did some tests to figure out if we should be going after the functional role of a C-level person who's making the decision, or the HR who's influencing it. The HR is actually experiencing the pain, but the C-level is making the decision. We didn't know which one to go for, so we figured let's test it and figure it out. Sorry, I should mention. On the broker, it was a lot more straightforward. We just wanted brokers. And ideally, we wanted them to be here close by in Texas so we can go talk to them face to face, because a lot of these people, that's what they prefer anyways. And we also wanted to focus on small business brokers, specifically brokers that were going after the same company types that we were, which is 0 to 100 employees. So how do we build this list? It's going to start getting interesting because I'm going to start showing you some of the tools. And so just so you know, there will be plenty of room for questions and answers in the end. So if you have a question, just write it down. I'll be happy to come back to a slide and talk through any tool. So where can you find your ITP? Think of that same ideal target profile that we had just profiled together for your product or for ours. Where are those people right now? Where can you find a nice, dense concentration of those people? And so here's some ideas. Buy bulk lists, I never recommend that. We tried it, and it didn't work so well. It's just not the right way to go. You're not getting targeted when you're doing a targeted bulk list, and you're buying it along with everyone else in the world. So you want to try to avoid that if you can, though sometimes you have no choice. You might be in a very generic field where it just makes sense. But think about LinkedIn groups, trade associations, conferences, websites of conferences where these type of customers would be profiled, or sponsoring or exhibiting. Think of job sites where they're hiring and they're putting out their name so that you know that they're thriving and doing well. Think of meetups just like this one, right? I mean, you guys are startups. This is a great place for me to go. Think of marketplaces and places like Angel.co or Crunchbase, or places like If you're going after contractors, for example, like service contractors, maybe you go to Amazon Services, or maybe you go to Craigslist even. I mean, just there's going to be a high concentration of these companies because they're trying to get to their customers. So they must be somewhere learning about their industry and trying to market to those customers. So once you figure that out, you go start building your list. So let me show you how we did it. So if you remember the school of thought for the brokers, let me show you how we did that one. Basically, we wanted to find brokers. We wanted them to be focused on small companies, and wanted them to be in Texas. So that was really easy, and that's why I started with that one. There's literally a directory of every broker in Texas. In fact, there's a directory of every broker in the US. Not surprisingly, they want you guys to find them. So, you know, they're quite happy advertising their name, their phone number, and any contact information that would make it easier for you to get to them. So we went to this broker directory, and we did a little magic. We used a web scraper called Kimono. Anybody here use Kimono? Great. So yeah, leave it up to the Internet of Things guy to know about Kimono. So yeah, Kimono is great. It's basically turns any web page into structured data for you. You know, you can essentially go use Kimono. It's a little Chrome extension, and immediately it takes all the information on the page that you're currently looking at, and you can click on the information and map it to fields. So, for example, in the directory, there was a broker's name. Clicked on that, mapped it to a broker's name. Phone number, mapped it. Email. Every bit of information that was on there, I grabbed. And the nice thing about that is you feed that all into a CSV file. So now I have all of their information, and it took me maybe 5 minutes to do. And I could just go through all the pages and grab as many as I want. I went through about 10, grabbed about 120 of them, called it a day, decided to move on to my other school of thought. Let's look at what we did for the high-tech companies. This one's a little trickier. Unlike the brokers, startups don't necessarily want their contact information everywhere, especially the successful ones. They decide to keep that stuff private, not surprisingly. But there's a couple of tricks I'll show you. So again, remember our ideal targeted profile was a high-tech company, younger than 5 years, 100 employees or less. And so here's what we did. We went to AngelList and Crunchbase. Anybody here use AngelList? Great. Any luck with it? Nod heads? Yes? No? Not yet? Soon to come, maybe, after this. So as you guys know, it's a really great aggregated place to find lots and lots of companies, especially ones that are under 100. Companies are kind of raising their seed round, looking for a job applicant, looking for an advisor. It's basically a way for entrepreneurs and founders to kind of gather as a community. And so the nice thing about that is you can go on AngelList and you can literally just start clicking through startups, and you can see the founders of each startup. And each founder has a name and then conveniently a link to their website. And so if you grab the domain name of the website and you grab their first and last name, you're in for a treat. Because luckily, there's a few startups out there that are doing quite well, making tools for you to turn that into contact information. So we take the name, we take the domain name, we go to a company like Twofer, and that's literally, as you can see on the form, all you need is the first name, last name, and the domain, and the email address pops out. Now you can do this in a much more bulk, API-driven kind of way. I don't necessarily recommend copying and pasting, but you can also upload a CSV file and immediately have it entirely populated, and it's very, very affordable. I mean, I think it was tens of cents or maybe 20 cents or something like that to get a contact information. Now, I will also give you another tip. If you don't want to spend the money, which is okay, even 10 or 20 cents can add up when you're doing hundreds of emails. There's a couple other tricks that are free. And then this trick is not just free, but it's also really powerful. It's called Reportive. It's a free tool given away by LinkedIn. you can marry it with Gmail, and you can literally go into Gmail, start typing in any email you can imagine, and someone's name is going to pop out on the other side who's got a profile on LinkedIn with that email associated with them. So that's really great for if you want to do just a couple manual ones, like 10 or 20. I should also mention Twofer. There's a list, and by the way, I'll provide at the end of the talk a way for you to contact me, and I'll send you all these tools, no problem. But I should mention that Twofer, sometimes you put in like 100 emails through, and maybe 40 of them won't have a match, or 20 of them won't have a match. So you got to go use another tool, and there's a couple of tools that you usually get about 80–90% by the time you're done. But then even then there's 10–20 left that you can't get. You can always use this tool to go get it. The other thing is, if you're going after some big accounts, maybe like a Fortune 5000, you're trying to find the CEO's email, much harder to find. You can use this. Twofer might not have that. So you can see I just put in Rudy Marsh, really nice guy. I know him well. And his LinkedIn popped up. So the point is that you can guess pretty much these days, right? I mean, everybody is a first name dot last name at domain, or first name initial. I mean, you try enough combination, you're going to find that person, and that's pretty much what the other tools are doing for you. It's just that they've pre-done that and then save that information, make it available for you for much for much easier convenience for a fee. But you can do that for free with this thing. And so the other tool that I should mention is SalesLoft and LinkedIn, which we've used. SalesLoft is a little bit more expensive, I think 50 cents a dollar, but it just makes it super convenient. I mean, you can literally just go on LinkedIn, do an advanced search for the exact criteria that we had. So people that are under, companies under 100, and I'm looking for the C-level guy, and I want it to be in the tech sector, and yada yada. Before you know it, it gives you a list, and you can just literally go down and with SalesLoft, just add. It adds them all to the convenient web interface, and then spits out the email addresses and even phone numbers sometimes. So you can use that as well if you want to kind of go a little faster and you've found some good traction with what you're doing. Okay, so let's talk about touch points real quick, because I think we've kind of covered what defining your audience means. Now that you have your audience, you built your lists, you got their email contact. Now what? Approaching people could be a bit scary sometimes, especially when you don't know how they're going to react, and could even feel like you're spamming. But thanks to the spam can law, this is actually not spamming, because you're contacting people who are business owners. And so you're going to have to reach out to them somehow. And I should say that how you go about the touch points has to do a little bit about your product or your industry. So some questions you should ask yourself: is your product high touch, complex enterprise, or is it low touch like SaaS? In other words, do you have to meet somebody and show them how the thing works? Does it take a long time to set it up? Do you need to get several departments on board to install it in their facility? If it's kind of high touch, then you're going to want to reach out to them differently than if it's someone like you're selling, chimp mail or something like that, where it's a free SaaS that could be tried and then decided on the spot, right? It's just different. Free SaaS you can do via email. You probably don't even need to do a phone call. If you're going to do something that's a little high touch, probably many emails to many stakeholders within the company, trying to get to enough touch points to where you've created this social phenomena in the company. Everybody's talking about you, and before you know it, they just can't live without you. Much harder, but obviously I'm hoping that if you're a high touch product, you also have a much higher sales ticket sale. So another question to ask about yourself is how many stakeholders. That's kind of the point I just talked about. And then how tech savvy are they, right? I mean, you could have something that's very low touch, but if you're selling it to people that are not very tech savvy, they may prefer you calling them or mailing them something. So I'm not going to focus too much on those, because again, this is more of a case study. Our guys, at least the companies who are high tech, we're going to be contacting them mostly via email. We're going to sprinkle in some phone calls, try to get them hearing about us from all sides, and the brokers also, they're perfectly fine with email and phone calls. But actually, phone calls worked much better with brokers. So just a quick stat. There was a study that was done and surveyed a bunch of sales development reps, which are basically the people that are doing this type of function I'm talking about, prospecting customers. And the study found that it takes up to 7.3 attempts before you get any traction with a customer. So if you go build that list and you go spend all that time trying to contact everybody on that list once, twice, 3 times, and you don't get good results and you just get frustrated and you walk away, you haven't hit that threshold. It takes a lot of time to reach people, and the higher touch it is, the more it takes. The lower touch it is, the more lucky you might get. So let me talk to you about what you do with that list and how you start approaching people. I love outreach. This is a tool that I highly recommend for anybody who's going to be doing any outreaching to anybody or any prospecting. It just keeps you organized, keeps everything automated, gives you great stats and data. Just love it. And if you contact me after this meeting, I'll be happy to show you a way to get a free trial with them, because they have one of those as well. It syncs up to Salesforce. It has Chrome extension. You can work out of Gmail with it right away. Very, very easy stuff. It's a lifesaver. So let's just take those 2 lists that we had, the broker list and the company list, and let's just import them. It's really easy to do. You just go into Outreach, you import the CSV file. And now that we did that, let's get started and reach out to these people. So it's really easy to do again. You can set up steps. They call them steps, which is basically touch points. And you just choose whether it's a phone call or an email or whatever it is. You set it up. You set enough of these up in a row. It's almost like a sequence that's going to happen. And when you can set up rules, when one thing happens, then do the other thing. Or when one thing happens, don't do the other thing. For example, if I email 100 people and one of them responds to me, don't keep sending email 2, 3, 4, 5. Not a good idea. That conversation needs to move away from the automated and onto a more manual offline thing, right? Same thing, there's a way where if nobody responds, then put them on a new sequence. So now, put all the guys that slacked and didn't respond to you on maybe a more aggressive sequence, for example. It lets you do all that, and it's really, really nice. It's also not that expensive. It's maybe $99 a month, I think, after your trial. I think there's even a promo code to get it for less. And it's per user, so if you had lots of users, you would, in your company, you would need more. But for $99, it saves you way more in that time. So here's a recommended, this is a company called SalesLoft. They recommended after a bunch of emails and calls that they did for their product. Now, bear in mind, they are probably somewhere in midpoint. They're not necessarily a low touch, but they're not a high touch. They do what I mentioned earlier, which is help you get information on the people you want to prospect. And so they did a bunch of stuff and published this information basically saying that the way that worked best for them, the sequence is what they call it, or steps if you use Outreach, is to do a voicemail and a mix of voicemail and emails throughout a 7-day period. And they call it the 7x7. And so you're essentially emailing, then you're maybe calling, saying, hey, I just sent you an email. Most people are going to let unknown numbers go to voicemail. So you just, hey, I just left you an email. Get back to me when you get a second. Now they hear your voice. You humanified the entire experience for them. You're no longer just an email along with the other 1,000. You're someone who left them a voicemail. So maybe your email is a little more important. I'll go check it out. And they just did that over 7 days. And the last one is actually called the breakup email. And I'll show you an example of that in just a second. So just really quick tips, because I know if you're going to go do this, you're going to start writing emails. And it's really important to just talk about the best practices. I don't want you to make the same common mistakes that lots of people make. Keep it short. I mean, you're just trying to make contact. You're not trying to throw up the information about your product You know, they don't want to hear that. They don't want a 3-page email about why your product will do, you know, every bell and whistle that they could ever dream of. That's not, they see that, that's the fastest way to delete. Keep it short. And make sure you're insightful. So what is insightful? If I was selling my product, and let's just say we're trying to make HR simple, right? If I was contacting them and said, hey, my product can do X, Y, Z, and it can do this and this and that, and it'll save you this and this and that, and are you experiencing any of these 10 pain points? Because if you are, you're in luck. I got a product for you. No, they're delete. Nobody's listening to that. But if you send them a quick, insightful email that says, hey, Bob, I noticed that the January 1st deadline for filing the Affordable Care Act forms are coming up quite quickly. What are you guys going to do? Like, what have you prepared to address that? How are you guys handling that? Just something really short like that, right? Just a question mark. Now he's sitting there and saying, wait a second, what is this Affordable Care Act form that I need to file? What's going on? You know, maybe I should look into this. Maybe I'll respond and ask, right? You've created contact, and that's really what you're trying to do. You're trying to get them to say yes. It's kind of like going on a date. You're not going to tell her why she's going to live the happiest life that ever been, you know, once she's married you. When you just met her, you just say, hey, you want to go grab a drink and talk about our, you know, volleyball, because we both like volleyball. It's just a contact. And to that point, find commonality. Find that volleyball. What do you and that customer have in common? And so I get that this is a little harder to do, especially when you're trying to do automate and kind of mass, but try to do this as much as possible. If you and that person have something in common, you are going to get skyrocket results compared to if you just email people out of the blue with no commonality. You'll still do better if you keep it short, and you'll still do better if you mention something that's interesting to them and insightful, but you'll do way better if you can find something in common. So things that are in common, you know, maybe you're part of the same association, maybe you know someone in common, maybe you know, you went to the same university and you're alumni, maybe you got funded by the same investor, maybe you're using the same product. You know, just anything that you can figure out about them, and you know, it's the internet age, there's tons of information out there. And then use triggers. If you saw news about them recently getting funded, great time to contact them. You know they got money, you know they're growing, you know they need your product, right? If you saw that they hired a key exec, maybe that's insight that they're changing their corporate strategy, and they're going more doubling down on whatever that exec's meant to do. Good way to get in, right? Talk about that. Show them that you're informed about who they are. And then just be persistent. I mean, the bottom line is just don't let any rocks go unturned. Just keep turning them, keep hitting them until they reply. You'd rather get a not interested or leave me alone than not get a response. Because a lot of people just didn't see your email, or just it didn't make sense, or you didn't get that 7.3 touch points before they were willing to respond. You weren't familiar to them, right? Keep going. What's the worst that could happen? And outreach is going to do that for you automatically. You'll be surprised, actually. You know, when I started doing this, I was like, oh man, am I going to get people telling me I'm spamming? Am I going to get people telling me to stop? Am I going to, you know, have to deal with people cussing me out? No, people are actually really nice. If you're really just trying to be insightful to them, and you know something about them that shows them that you're not just an automated email that, you know, had no thought or intent behind it, other than to try to sell them on something, they'll take the time to at least tell you you're not interested. Of course, then you can follow up and ask why. Maybe start a conversation, learn a little bit about what turns them off or makes them not an ideal target profile. Maybe you know, can iterate from there. So measure, iterate, and scale. Let's talk about that real quick. So I love data. This is my favorite part, because once you've done this for 2 weeks, then you just get to, you know, it's like Scrooge rolling in dough. It's just like you're just rolling in the data and you're playing with it and you're slicing and dicing it, and you know, your wife's telling you to go to sleep and you're like, no, but I gotta see what it looks like if I do this. And you know, it doesn't always look better. It was fun. So this is the rewards. I mean, you finally have sent all these emails, and now you're going to see how it does. And so these are our results. At the top is the school of thought for contacting companies. At the bottom is the school of thought for brokers. And we had a nice little Friday party to look at these numbers and figure out what makes more sense for us. We went ahead and looked at these numbers, and right away you see from here that the reply rates is higher from company founders, not surprising, but that the clicks are also lower on the brokers and reply side. But what was surprising is that these numbers would fool you if you didn't actually play out the conversations, right? If you just had people respond to you but you didn't play out the conversation, you would have thought, hey, maybe I should go talk to company founders. That seems pretty cool, and they're more likely to respond and so forth. But you have to keep track of everything else. So we kept track of what the response was. Was it a positive response or a negative response? And then when we walked them through to try to get them to an appointment or a demo to look at our product, which is the real test, right? Because it's easy to send a response. That takes 2 seconds. It's much, much more of a time commitment for someone to say, yeah, I'll look at your product for 30 minutes. When we looked at that, we didn't do so well with the companies compared to the brokers. We only converted about 1.5% of the people who responded to us into an actual conversation of a 30-minute commitment. And in the meantime, the brokers, they didn't respond quite as often, but when they did, boy, were they excited. Were they excited to see our product. And so those takeaways for us were basically startup founders are more responsive, not surprisingly. Most of you guys are probably looking at your phone right now trying to respond to something. I don't take offense to that. I would do it too. There's always something to respond to. Brokers, you maybe more a little old school, 5, 6 o'clock, they're off the clock, and they maybe not. Maybe they're more likely to respond at night. Maybe they're more likely to respond the weekend. But they're not responding as much. And then most of them are too busy to talk, the founders. So they'll respond, but that's all they'll give you. They'll give you that 5-second commitment to respond. And then you ask them to see a product, you ask them to do a demo, you ask them to talk further. They're too busy, right? They have to focus on raising money, finding their own customers, etc. And so the brokers have an immediate pain point, while the companies, the founder, he's not thinking that this is priority number 1 for him, right? But the brokers, they're getting killed by that company in Silicon Valley right now, and they're trying to figure out what do they do about it. So that's a huge driver, right? We found a pain point. We found a real pain point that someone is willing to take and invest time. And if they're willing to invest their time, they're going to willing to invest their money. And so we were very, very excited about this for 2 reasons. One, the conversion for the companies actually came out higher than we expected. So Michael Google, our other co-founder, he put together all these complicated spreadsheets that I would never be able to even attempt. But basically, with these numbers, both models could work for us. So it's just a matter of what we wanted to do. But we were able to gather all that data and figure out how to move to the next step. So let me just talk to you a little bit about the kind of metrics that you should be tracking. So most notably, you should have your ideal target and then track things like how many emails did you send out, or how many calls did you make, versus how many responses did you get. And of those responses, how many of them were positive? How many of them were not positive? How many of them didn't respond at all, right? And you better keep emailing if they don't respond. And then how many appointments did you book from the people that did respond, right? You keep track of all that data, and then that data feeds into your sales cycle. So those demos or appointments then lead to sales, and that's ultimately the actual number that really matters. But if you don't have a product yet, you can't make a sale, but you can get as far as that and validate your entire business model before you even sell a product, right? Then you're just missing that one number. What is my conversion from appointment to sale? And if someone spent 30 minutes looking at your product, it's probably over 10% that they're going to buy. And so these are good metrics to keep track of throughout the process. So enough about this stuff. Let me just show you some fun things that worked for us. Humor works really well. I keep talking about Michael Google. He's a really funny guy. He wrote this email, and if you can look, the top two were an email previous to his email, and then he wrote the breakup email. Remember that breakup email I told you guys about? Yeah, you can break up with people you never even met. It's fun. But apparently, his email just did extraordinarily well. And it's not actually too much of an anomaly because most breakup emails actually do well, but his especially did extremely well. So what is that? You guys want to see what that breakup email looks like? Yeah? Okay, me too. So you can see though, his email got way more responses than any of the previous emails. And I can tell you, going all the way back, this is day 7, email 5, day 9, and previous days were no better. I mean, it was just 1% here, 2% there. Usually your first email does okay because they're like, who is this? And then after that, you've kind of gotten all the, quick responders. Those are usually going to be like, you're not interested guys, or maybe you'll get a take or not. And then after that, it just dies down. They're like, oh, it's this guy again. How do I get off this list? Oh, God. And then eventually they're like, wait, this guy's a little creative and funny. Maybe I'll talk to him. And by the way, I've been thinking about this thing. Maybe I need to talk to him about it. So let's look at this email. I won't read it for you. I think picture says 1,000 words. So this email is funny enough, but he finished it with, actually that's the part I added. That's the salesy side. Hey, love to talk to you. But he finished it with this. And you would be surprised how many emails I got back. And not just emails, but people saying, that is clever, that is funny, that made my day. Wow, I like the way you approached that. Just amazing, right? I mean, I went from people saying not interested to all of a sudden just having a positive attitude about my email. And that's all it takes for me to strike that conversation. That's the beginning. We start there. And then I start talking to them about their other problems and try to find what pain points we can solve for them. Let me show you one more thing. So this is a good example why you should test everything. So my name is Nir, right? Not a very familiar name, not a very generic name either. Some people might think foreigner or who knows what, right? And so I thought maybe I would get a better response if my name was something different. So decided I was going to be Heather. Heather Brown, really nice lady, best employee we ever owned. She works for free. She's like a robot. She's kind of like that minion from earlier in the slides. And Heather sent out these emails. But here's something very peculiar. Heather sent out both of these emails, and I A/B tested both of these emails. They're identical, but one of them is doing almost 2 times better than the other. I got 7% clicks versus 13% clicks, 4% replies versus 8% replies. What is the answer? Why is one doing twice as better? I call outreach. No. Then I remembered, wait a second, I don't have the same signature on both. The signature makes a difference. All of a sudden, Heather with a picture is doing better than Heather without a picture. And Heather without a picture, unfortunately, is doing better than Nir, with a picture or without. Wasn't the best thing for my self-esteem, but it did help me understand that we should test everything and that I should probably start hiring more Heathers. That was a really great study for us. And then, let's just talk about next steps. So I think I walked you through how to identify your audience, how to build that list, how to get the contacts, how to import into outreach, how to then use some of the best pro tips to contact people, how to get those responses, how to use humor, creative, insight. What do you do next? What do we do next? Well, you just keep refining, because a week ago I didn't have Heather, and a week ago I was sending the same amount of emails, spending the same amount of time, but I was getting half the results. And now I'm getting twice the results, and it's all because I iterated. So keep testing who you're contacting, keep testing the messaging you're sending them, and then just iterate. And when you finally can plug those numbers into a complicated spreadsheet model like the one Michael Google built for us, and it works, your time spent on this stuff brings back more than what you would pay someone to do that same job, then start scaling. Start hiring additional sales development reps. Hire 3 at a time, I recommend, because usually 2 will not work out anyways. And just let them have a little competition. Who can beat your numbers? Bring them in, get them an outreach, let them start going at it. And another thing you can do to scale is outsource. There's several companies out there that will do these prospecting for you. But it's really important for you to do this first. And why? Because at first, you're really just learning about your value proposition. You're really learning about your pain points. You're really learning about who your targeted profile is. And if you just go to a company and tell them, hey, do this for me, I'll pay you guys to do it, and you didn't give them this information, they're going to spend all that time doing that R&D, and they're not going to be as good at figuring it out as you are, and they don't care because you're paying them by the lead or by the time, so they're going to waste a lot of your money. So make sure you do it first. Make sure you get all that information, nail that down, and then scale. If you can't do it, if you as a founder can't get that done, then nobody's going to get that done for you. So I talked to you guys about how to use this approach for testing the product market fit, how to use customer acquisition, how to use for strategic partners, which was our brokers. And I want to also share with you guys that the next thing I'm going to be spending my next month or 2 on is on fundraising. And so I'll be using this exact same technique with fundraising. And if you email me, I'll be happy to report results for you guys when I have them via email. And recently Jason, our Chief Technical Officer, said that we need to figure out a more scalable way to get talent recruitment. Apparently those guys are charging 10 to 20% of the first year's salary, and we have a side bet that we can do it for cheaper with this approach. Maybe hire somebody for 40, 50,000, show them exactly how to do this, and have them be our recruiter in-house. So we're going to be using that as well, and like I said, if you want to see the results of those tests, email me, and as soon as I have them in a couple of months, I'll be happy to share them with you. And then that's it. So any questions? Thank you. I don't know if we have an extra mic for people with questions. I see Paul running somewhere, so I'm guessing that's where he's going. No, it was just to put his drink somewhere. Is that a strategic spot for your drink? Okay. Sure. Yep. Works too. Cool. Who is it? No. Pass it around.
So what do you call this role in the company? Is this inside sales, or what is this?
Yeah, so they're called sales development reps, or sometimes you'll see them called business development reps. Basically just fancy names for people who prospect, and they're usually either report to sales or marketing, depending on how you have your organization set up. And I didn't go into this because I didn't, I overloaded you with enough information for today. But usually when you set this up and you're scaling, you really want to specialize those roles. So you want each sales development rep who's going to be doing this to specialize in inbound versus outbound, because you're going to have inbound as well, right? So you put all this content out, people fill out a form, they want to talk to you. Those should be sales development reps reaching out to those inbound people. But those are easier to convert than the guys that you have to reach out cold to. So you want to separate those two. And you want those sales development reps to work closely with your account executives or salespeople. And so, yeah, it's a sales development rep or a business development rep. Good question, though.
Hey, Nir. Great presentation, by the way.
Thank you.
You mentioned SalesLoft and using that with LinkedIn. I was wondering if SalesLoft worked also with like AngelList or Crunchbase or something like that.
Right. So I believe right now SalesLoft works with Google. So you can go and literally they have some ways where you can game Google to. Because if you think about it, LinkedIn is a closed system, right? You have to log in to see people. But anybody who's on LinkedIn is also going to be scraped by Google. It's just that you won't get to see, where they worked before and all that stuff. But, you just need their name, and then that converts with SalesLoft into a contact name. So the point is you can use Google, you can search for anything, and then on LinkedIn, and it will allow you to do that. And I think that you can also import any companies, even if you don't have names. You just import the company names or the domain names, and they'll spit out contacts. So they've pre-scraped all of Google, basically. And so to answer your question, no, it doesn't work with Angel.co, and I don't believe it works with Crunchbase. But if you go to Crunchbase, for example, Crunchbase has a way for you to download the entire database. You can literally go to Crunchbase, download the entire database, grab the company names, put them into SalesLoft, and it'll spit out all the roles, and you just like shopping spree. Just like buy all the people that you want on there, and you can filter them down and so forth. Good question. There's other tools, by the way, other than SalesLoft and Twofer and those. I just didn't want to put 100 names on there.
Hey Nir, so quick question. I know.
Sorry, do you mind? I guess we skip. But can you say your name and the company you're with, just because?
Okay. I'm Samir. I'm actually an intern at
Okay.
Software Solutions. So you talked a lot about how, or it seemed like your entire case was based on B2B models. Are there any additional pitfalls that we need to look out for like B2C models?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess I thought it would be goes without saying that you don't really want to spend all this time and do all this work if at the end of the day you're getting a $10 sale, right, or a $50 sale or a $100 sale. So you want things that have a very high sales ticket. I mean, at least $3,000 or more. Otherwise, the math won't work out, right? Because the whole idea is you do this, you figure out the units of economics, and then once it makes sense for you, then you go scale by hiring other people to do it that are cheaper than your own salary, right? But even if you go hire cheaper people that can do that, I mean, it's not going to work if the product at the end of the day that they're trying to sell is not in the thousands of dollars per year. So if you got something that is thousands of dollars per year or a lifetime value of 10,000 plus over a couple of years, it'll start making sense. But anything below that, it won't make sense. Now, I will say that there's a caveat. You can use this for product market fit for consumers. So it's just, that's really all you're going to do. You're not going to be able to scale that. But yeah, it's a good question. I would not recommend it it's too intensive and high touch and resource intensive to do that. I mean, you're much better off finding cheaper ways to sell consumer products if they're not going to have that price point.
Hi, my name is Kumar. I'm a great presentation, by the way, and I'm sitting here and thinking why didn't I come to this 6 months ago? So I was doing customer acquisition and all that 6 months ago. I like the thing that you mentioned that you talk to it takes 7 trials before you get somebody. I was wondering what's the ideal number of customer you should talk to before you actually decide on something.
Sure. So just let me re-ask the question and see if I understand it. Okay. You're saying how many prospects you should try to prospect before your data converges into some significant statistics?
Yeah, I mean, to give me my example, I sent say 200 emails and I think I got replies from 20 to 30, and out of those 200 emails half of them were not even my ideal customer. So how long should I do it? How many people?
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, the way we think about it is you want to send until you get some statistically significant number, and so I sent to you notice to the brokers, right? As an example, I sent only 120 of those emails, right? But that's because I got 9% demo out of that. So I literally had 10 demos set up in those 2 weeks where I was talking face to face or via web conference with a broker, showing him our product, getting his feedback, trying to get him to see if he's ready to buy, etc. Right? So at that point, I felt more than happy because I felt like I was getting tons of value out of it. But on the other hand, the companies were converting a much lower percentage to demo, 1.5, and I probably should have even done more than I have. But I had 500 on that, and then I had Heather chipped in for another 300. So we got about 800 out of there. So about almost 10 times as much, and it makes sense because I needed 10 times as much. I was converting at almost a tenth of the convert. So I guess bottom line is if you can take 30 minutes out of 10 customers that you think are your ideal, I think you'll be able to figure out if they're really your ideal customer and if they're really willing to buy. Any question?
Hi.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Brad Kovnet, founder, CEO of Numi Express. And curious, did you ever try surveys, and how successful were they for you in your testing?
Surveys in survey the people that I prospected, or?
Correct, survey the process?
So I did do something interesting. So when I got a response saying not interested, which with the company founders was quite often, if you remember the reply rates were 20%. So 20%, 500. I had over 100 responses. It's just that most of them were negative. And when I say negative, I don't mean in a like I'm going to go hide somewhere because my feelings are hurt, but they were just like not interested, not a good fit, already did this, already did that. So one thing I didn't show you guys, what I would keep very meticulous notes, and Outreach allows you to do that. Every time I got a response back, so just picture this because I don't have a slide for it. Gmail is right there. On the side of it is Outreach, just popping out. The contact that I'm looking at the response for automatically populates on the right side from Outreach. So now I have that information. I know exactly what sequence they were on, what step they're on, all that, right? And then I can immediately add tags. So I was adding tags like, this guy's a customer of that product. This guy's a customer of that product. This guy says he's not interested. This guy says he's not interested because X, Y, Z. And then what I would do is I would take those and I built a new sequence which basically contacted all those people, surveying them, if you will, for why, And I would try to just say, in that case, it was a company, so it was much easier. I tried to find the commonality by saying, hey, CEO to CEO or founder to founder, like, why aren't you interested? I'm trying to find product market fit. You know what that feels like. Tell me, why are you not interested in this offering? What could I have done differently? And I got a lot of really qualitative information that helped me refine my pitch.
So did you ever use like SurveyMonkey or Fluid Survey?
So you just mean survey? No, I didn't use. I used surveying through that process, but I didn't use survey in this thing. Sure, I've used SurveyMonkey before, but not through this approach. It'd be interesting to see how to do a survey. I would take it that the response rate is probably going to be higher if you incentivize or otherwise, but you're doing this not because you want people to respond. You're doing it, and you don't want them to tell you that they all want a red car, right? You want to put a red car in front of them and say you're ready to buy because you're trying to figure out if it's scalable. And the only way to figure out if it's scalable is to put them in that decision point, see if they're willing to take on it.
Thanks. Kinley Clark, founder of Project Insiders. So up until now, we've done mostly inbound marketing with a lot of CEO sales. So it's time to build an inside sales team, SDRs, start doing some outbound. How do you suggest going about that? Who are the first hires? How do you compensate them?
Sure.
How do you build that team?
Yeah, so good question. And by the way, congrats. That means that you're in a good point in your business, and we all strive to be there. The way I would first think about it is hopefully you have somebody currently on your team that's going to do something like what I just showed, so that you can at least figure out what the unit of economics look like for cold calling, right? So for inbound, that's much easier. You get lots of those leads every day. You can just put somebody on there and you can figure that out. But for the outbound, you need someone to do this, and ideally it's somebody who's like a co-founder or at least very high up that understands, the ins and outs of the product and kind of like the emotional drivers behind why people would buy them. Because really what you're trying to do is refine your pitch. Once you got that, and once the unit economics makes sense, I would recommend going out and hiring 3 SDRs, sales development reps, that would essentially be doing that very same work for him. And then he will now be repurposed to do nothing but close. So he will be doing nothing but taking those that are saying interested, show me that 30-minute presentation, and he'll do those. Because 2 things. 1, he'll understand the quality of the SDRs bringing in, and 2, he's more likely to close, which will help your numbers. And then once you've got that, then you just continue to scale in those. And that's the other thing you should be keeping an eye on at that point, is you're trying to see, okay, so how many SDRs can keep one account executive busy, right? And so that's why having those 3 to start with will make sense. It might be 1 to 3, it might be 1 to 1, or it might be 1 to 6. And then you're going to have to think of them as a business unit. So now that you're ready to scale the next business unit, you go get an account executive with 3 more SDRs, and then so forth and so forth. One pro tip that I would give you is that recruiters or people that work in recruitment or HR are actually great prospectors, because that's really what they do all day. They go on LinkedIn and try to find people that would fit that position perfectly for the hiring company. So they're actually great for this prospecting job, and they do quite well in them. Good question. Thank you.
Is anyone else?
Okay, this is going to have to be the last question, okay?
Okay.
I appreciate
Hi,
it.
Kyle Amata. I'm founder of DataFuel, which is one of the RED Labs startups. You mentioned earlier about approaching the people with the pain versus approaching the person that is approving that decision to buy the product. Which one did you find more success with?
Yeah, so I think, by the way, Red Lab's awesome. Like, just love this setup. Really cool. Just love it. Yeah, it reminds me a lot of Capital Factory in Austin. To answer your question, so the question is, do you approach the person with the pain, or do you approach the person who's a decision maker? And I'd like to add to that question an additional way to think about that. There's been lots of studies on top-down versus bottoms-up, especially when you start going to Fortune 5000. There's been, oh, you should contact the person right above the person that you think actually needs to get this message and ask to be referred down, because then when they refer you down, all of a sudden, you know, their boss's name is on that email chain and they take it a little more seriously. That works in some cases. And then there's the bottoms up where it's like, don't bug the guy at the top because he's not going to be thinking about this right now. Get to the person who is actually experiencing the pain point and work your way up, right? And so both have, you know, their pros and cons. Personally for us, because that's the question, personally for us, we found that going to the co-founders made a lot more sense. I don't have enough data to back this up, but my hypothesis for that would be because we were targeting companies that are 100 and less, and actually we're kind of more, you know, top heavy on 50 or less. And so I would think that in a 50 or less company, you still have founders very involved, very want to be part of all decisions. They take a lot of pride in how the company's operating. They're taking a lot of pride in how, you know, there's efficiencies and optimization. They may bring in, and that happened in a couple of demos, they brought in their HR person or their emailed their HR and said, hey, schedule this and let's see this. But we found that going to the top made a lot more sense because when we went to HR, they just didn't care. They just, and maybe that's because, you know, they weren't really true HR. I mean, companies under 100 don't always have an HR department, so that person's probably not really there trying to, you know, earn their dollar making HR better. They're probably just a side job that they have, and so they're not really emotionally invested in it. Thank you for the question, guys. Appreciate it, and hopefully I can see you guys. Thanks.
Thanks so much to Nir for coming out here. And normally what we're going to do is we're going to, you know, I'm going to be running around cleaning up the space and stuff. You guys are welcome to stay for probably about another half hour tops, mingle with each other. I don't know if you need to leave right away or if you're here, but we're going to just probably about 30 minutes as people kind of meander out. And thanks for coming out.